You and I have just lived through history. What exactly is the true nature of the UFOs seen over British air bases? One thing that we do know is that they sent a very effective message to the British government. These unknown aerial vehicles are the most egregious invasion of British airspace in recent history. But what are they? Let's look very carefully at what people saw.
Okay, that's definitely a drone of some kind. Keeps changing its trajectory.
This footage was filmed outside the perimeter fence of RAF Lakenheath. You can clearly see strange craft in the sky with lights on. These were captured by a friend of this channel, Angry Astronaut. He drove up to Lakenheath and Mildenhall and had an amazing encounter with a strange person. It was at night. He didn't know all the back roads around the airbase, but while taking a single-track rural road around Lakenheath, suddenly an object zoomed over his head into a field. It was obviously a drone, but underneath, it was carrying something very strange, a bright red LED light. He then noticed a darkened vehicle by the side of the road, which started up and sped off. Could the occupants of that vehicle be somehow connected to what he was seeing in the sky? Okay, I think what Angry Astronaut actually saw was an enormous clue. It's a great shame he didn't get the mysterious vehicle's license plate number. In this video, right here, right now, let's look at the clues of what really might be going on. So, I reached out to David Dunn, Professor of Political Science and International Relations at Birmingham University. Dr. Dunn has been studying these incursions into British airspace and has some staggeringly interesting information about the possible perpetrators. Professor Dunn, David, what message do you think these perimeter drone incursions into various MOD and NATO bases, not only plases with airplanes and possibly nuclear missiles, but also residential camps where MOD service people have been are living? What message do you think it's sending to British government and the MOD and NATO?
I think there are three aspects of this activity. It's disruptive, first of all. It's demonstrating and signaling vulnerability and capability. And it's also about preparation and signaling that preparation. So let's go and look at those in terms. So the disruption, it's clearly causing a great deal of distress and upset at these US bases. They'll have to respond to these by putting their personnel on standby, on alert. They're actually having to get people to try and record and intercept, possibly, and prepare to defeat these incursions, because this is not just one or two drones like in Gatwick Airport a few years ago. This is a coordinated incursion by a whole variety of different drones that are clearly part of a plan by a sophisticated actor. And so this is very disruptive. And I think, as well as being disruptive, it's sending a signal. It's sending a signal saying that we have the capacity to actually put assets over your most sensitive air bases, where you operate your most sophisticated and important strategically aircraft for the defense of Europe through NATO. And we have the capacity to fly over and both disrupt your air operations, to actually identify those assets by the use of cameras.
Right.
And as part of that, because drones have a kinetic and military capability, we have the ability to actually deliver effect at distance over your air bases through these drone activities. So it's about signaling to the Americans and to the British and other Europeans where these drones are operating that the opponent, and we think it's Russia, has the capability. So it's signaling capability, but it's also demonstrating and signaling preparation. Not only have we got the capability, but we're also, as part of these incursions, preparing to actually exercise that capability by going after your assets. And that can take a variety of forms. And I think the nature of the incursions is particularly interesting in that regard. So it's operating over B-52 bases, over the F-35 and F-15 bases, and it's actually showing a capacity to hit those things on the ground. But they also went to RAF Kirkenwell, which is a married quarters.
Right.
Now that's particularly sinister, because it's not just saying we have the capability to go after the aircraft. It's showing that we have the capability to spy on, to record, to gather information, gather intelligence, and demonstrate capability to go after the personnel who operate on that airbase, and in particular the aircrew that operate those systems, because these are highly stealthy aircraft in some cases. They are ones that are housed in hardened aircraft carrier aircraft shelters. Yeah. They are protected at every part of their flight. So in many ways, the most vulnerable part of that network of operations is when the crews go home to their families in the evening. So if these drones are following these crews over the married quarters, identifying where the air crew go, identifying where they live, identifying where their children go to school, that's demonstrating a willingness to potentially go after the families or the individual personnel of the airbase infrastructure. And that is a very worrying and disruptive and unsettling, as well as important vulnerability that the Russians are demonstrating in doing this. So there's a variety of signals that have been sent here about their preparation for the ability to actually target these individuals and these facilities and these capabilities if they should wish to do so.
Oh, I think it's absolutely, it's a major incident we're living through. And as you say, David, that it's occurred at a number of places. Now, you've mentioned, and it seems likely that this operation is being carried out by a foreign actor, possibly Russia, and the timing of it seems rather sensible for them, that Britain has now sending long-range missiles to the Ukraine, and it was basically putting the willy up, as I would say, up Britain. But David, how on earth would a country over 2,000 miles away, Russia, organize this multiple base operation of some type of flying craft? Do you think this was a massive incursion by Russians into Britain, or did they recruit what used to be called useful idiots, going back to my day? Explain the term useful idiots and how Russia and the KGB and maybe other countries have signed up British citizens to do things, and then explain to me who you think today is doing this and how it would work.
Okay, I want to take one step back if I can, because I want to explain why I think it's a foreign actor rather than somebody else, an independent domestic agent. I've written extensively on drones for the last 10 years and appeared on TV talking about this. And you can talk about there is three categories. There's blunderers, people who just fly their drones into the wrong place, right? Who actually make a mistake. There are blockheads who know they're doing something wrong, but do it anyways because they want to see the effect they have. And then there are bad guys who are doing it with malicious intent, Okay, and if it's a protest, and we have had protests at airports from environmental protesters, then when they do it, they claim responsibility, because there's no point in doing it for a cause if you don't claim the political effect for that cause in doing so. The interesting thing with these incursions, no one claimed responsibility.
Right.
So there's it's not about Palestine or about the environment. It's another sort of actor who's doing it for another sort of reasoning, who actually knows that their actions themselves will be read as the message without having to spell it out in the media through a media statement. So that's the first point. And the second point, this is part of a wider series of activities that we suspect the Russians have been engaged in over a number of months as part of the wider hybrid warfare or grey zone conflict between the West and Russia. So we've seen incendiary devices sent through the post. One actually went on fire in a courier's warehouse at Birmingham Airport. There has been a warehouse burnt down in London that was storing material that was about to be supplied to the Ukrainian armed forces. There has been an intercepted attempt to actually murder the German chief executive of Rheinmetall, one of the big arms suppliers to Ukraine. So there are a number of activities, sabotage, subversion activities that we suspect, because of who the targets are, comes from Russia. So this seems to be part of that overall pattern. And the timing is important here, because the timing of these air incursions over the air bases happened at the same time as that Joe Biden lifted the restrictions on the use of ATACMS, and the UK lifted its restrictions on the use of Storm Shadow to be used at longer range on Russian territory, admittedly in this case Russian territory with a caveat that Russian territory that was actually in the area of Kursk, where the Ukrainians had taken an enclave. So not a blanket use, but a limited escalation. And it seems as if, and as part of the Russian strategy of escalation dominance, which is a military or strategic studies term that actually means that the Russians want to be one step ahead on their threat of violence up the escalation ladder than the West seems willing to do, that this is part of that signaling to the wider case. Now, who's doing this? I suspect it's not the Russians, in the same way that people who've been involved in the sabotage activities where they have been arrested have been found not to be Russians. And the reason why they're doing this is to actually avoid a direct attribution of their responsibility. It's about them having someone else do it on their behalf, rather than them doing it directly, so that the West is not forced into a situation where it must respond and must accept that actually the Russians are engaged in low-level warfare activity against the West, and to act accordingly. So the Russians would rather send the signal of their the capabilities and vulnerabilities of the West, and do it through third actors. And who we found in the past doing this is often people of Eastern European descent. They are Bulgarians or Poles, maybe first generation or second generation. And the big question there is, are these deep sleepers from these countries' secret services who've been lying low for years, as the Russians have done throughout the Cold War and for many years, having people come in and be these deep sleeping agents that have finally been activated? Or is it simply the case that actually the Russian Secret Service, probably through the internet, through the dark web and through encrypted channels, have recruited these individuals, either because of they've got family relatives who are being blackmailed back home. Maybe there's some affinity with the Slavic sense of nationhood and the Russian cause in a broader sense, but more likely it is that they have just been paid large amounts of money into their bank accounts in order to do this. And of course, they have been directed as to what to do by the state actor in terms of actually what to buy, where to buy it, how to operate it, and how to coordinate the incursions that have taken place as part of this. So that seems to me, and other people that I've read, to be the most likely course and source of these activities, given the other contexts that we know. In terms of useful idiots, that's a term to ask me to explain. During the Cold War, The Russian, the KGB, would actually pay some sums of money to European peace movements
Yeah.
to actually support their activities. I knew a friend at university who used to brag that his car was paid for by Gorbachev, because it was paid for by CND. He was involved in a thing called Cruise Watch, where
Oh,
actually
yeah.
protesters followed the deployment of cruise missiles around the
Yeah.
Berkshire countryside.
Yeah.
And he was provided with a car because he was a student and no means to have otherwise, and in order to do that. And what they did was they actually identified where the cruise missiles were moving around, which was a militarily advantageous thing to report to his organization. He thought it was CND. Well, it was CND, but it was also information that probably found its way back to Moscow. So and the term at the time was that these were useful idiots. They
Yeah.
were idiots in the sense that they were effectively working for a foreign power without necessarily realizing it, or if they did realize it, they thought that that was a useful thing in terms of actually bringing wider peace to Europe, rather than actually aiding the foreign enemy who was intent on actually identifying these targets and hitting them with nuclear weapons. So there was, that term comes from that period. So, but I don't think we're seeing necessarily useful idiots in operation here. I suspect that what's going on here is that they are operating on the basis of being paid to do what they do, that they have no compunction about betraying their country, because it's not really necessarily a country they identify with first and foremost, which is why perhaps that they're using Eastern European emigres to do it, because I think British people would think twice about betraying their country, or certainly most of them would. And therefore, I think it comes down to the agents of a foreign power who are paid agents to do criminal work. They're probably low-level criminals who've already been identified. Maybe they're being blackmailed, or more likely to be being paid. And it's them who are the agents of the foreign power in this instance, I think.
Oh, I think that's absolutely fascinating political history. I mean, is it possible that there is an allegiance in some modern 2024 political movements with British citizens who aren't Eastern European, who also might be persuaded?
I mean, what we find through the fracturing of opinion that comes from
Right.
engagement with social media and the creation of all sorts of groups to identify like-minded individuals through the web, that there is a fractured consensus on what is regarded as a political orthodoxy. So it's entirely possible that the attribution for these activities could come from a myriad of sources. However, there's no evidence to suggest that's the case, and there is evidence to suggest that there have been sabotage activities paid for, most likely, by the Russians and perpetrated by Bulgarians and Poles and others. And that seems to point in that direction. Although one can't be categoric on these things, but there was certainly the evidence so far would suggest that that is the case. And again, if there were people doing it for a right-wing cause, then they could be expected to claim attribution and say, "I'm doing it for this reason."
Right.
And in the absence of that, that suggests other motivation.
Oh, I think that's very interesting. So, do you think this drone incursions will suddenly stop because the message has now been sent?
I think the purpose has been served in that there has been that signalling demonstrated, and it may well be that the intelligence has been gathered that they wanted. And of course, the RAF regiment, which is responsible for airfield security in the UK, has been alerted and are deploying to these air bases in an attempt to identify, apprehend, and defeat these incursions. And there are many anti-drone technologies that they are now equipped with. And of course, the perpetrator wouldn't want to have those drones recovered, and therefore that attribution chain investigated. So it may well be that they will desist, having made their point at this point in time.
No, I think that's a really fascinating. Well, right. Well, I think we've covered it. I think it's great. Tell me, are you publishing a paper on this? Are we living through an interesting era that is something that you're incorporating into your education, into what you're talking about?
I've just finished a book on the first drone debate called Drones, Force and Law, published by Cambridge University Press with a colleague, which is a 40,000-word book on some of the implications of the use of things like Predator and Reaper over Afghanistan, Syria and Iraq. I have written a number of articles, including a piece back in 2013 when I first warned about the security implications, particularly for terrorists, of drones. That was in International Affairs. And I've written a number of pieces since then. But I'm primarily writing on Donald Trump just now because that is the more immediate and perhaps the larger challenge to the security of the West than even Mr. Putin.
Professor David Dunn, thank you very much. I think you've given us a really new insight into who could be the perpetrators. Thank you very much for today. And if my viewers have specific questions, can we have you back to answer them?
Certainly. I'm very happy to come back.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Dunn. That was really interesting, and I hope you viewers found it as fascinating as I did. Please use me and this channel to ask Dr. Dunn more questions about this egregious invasion of British airspace. Hopefully, this invasion has ended. The truth is out there.